Just transitioning. Mahalo nui Nai'a and Momi for creating the space and welcoming us today. Aloha, everyone. My name is Kalani Quiocho. I come from Hilo on the island of Hawaii, and I serve as the Cultural Resources Coordinator for NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, overseeing cultural heritage management activities within research, education policy, and indigenous and local community engagement, primarily dedicated to the Pacific Islands region. I served as the Native Hawaiian Program Specialist for the monument for Papahana Mokuakea for 5 years, and led the development of Mai, which is a Native Hawaiian guidance document for the management of Papahana Mokuakea. And I did this in collaboration with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, who is a co-trustee, alongside the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group that was mentioned yesterday by Nai'a, and the monument co-managing agencies seen here on the title slide. I will share about how Hawaiian cultural traditions are part of the methodology and framework for planning and development of Mai, which was formerly known as the Native Hawaiian Plan or the Native Hawaiian Management Plan. So I may use these terms interchangeably just for historical narrative purposes. But I want to emphasize that I won't go over Mai in detail. We'll drop in links to a longer webinar and also the document itself if you're interested to learn more. But rather, I'd like to focus on a brief overview, a brief history of the process, which took over 10 years. So on the next slide, just to keep the place in our minds, here is Papahana Mokuakea, which is about 1.5 million square kilometers. It's roughly the size of the Gulf of Mexico and larger than all but 20 countries in the world, and the largest conservation area in the United States. It includes many islands, atolls, and reefs, and even submerged seamounts and other geological features, with 10 main emergent islands noted here. The vision of the monument is to forever protect and perpetuate ecosystem health and diversity and Native Hawaiian cultural significance of Papahana Mokuakea. The mission of the monument is to carry out seamless integrated management to ensure ecological integrity and achieve strong long-term protection and perpetuation of Northwestern Hawaiian Islands ecosystems, Native Hawaiian culture, and heritage resources for current and future generations. In 2008, the Monument Management Plan was completed as a 15-year plan. Within the Monument Management Plan, there are 22 action plans. This is still a living document that we're managing under. And among these 22 action plans were 2 Native Hawaiian action plans. Basically, they were the foundation for the Native Hawaiian Management Plan. And they came from the 2 action plans that were focused on Native Hawaiian culture and history and Native Hawaiian community involvement. So culture and community involvement. And they were focused on ways to integrate, protect, and perpetuate Native Hawaiian culture. And that's really important, to protect and perpetuate Native Hawaiian culture. And the intention was to include updated and expanded goals and strategies and activities to address priorities that Native Hawaiians were interested in, yet also aim to be inclusive of other stakeholders and constituents. In 2010, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries began a multi-year process to complete the Native Hawaiian Management Plan. And during the early development of the plan, a deliberate effort was made to conduct really extensive consultation meetings with the Native Hawaiian community on 5 of the 8 populated Hawaiian islands over the course of several years. The development process was especially interesting because we were basically using conventional planning processes that were informed by indigenous concepts, values, and knowledge systems with unique and diverse perspectives across the archipelago. For 2 years, there was a lot of important information gathered from the Native Hawaiian community. For several years, you can see that there's a gap in, you may not be able to see it, but from 2012 to 2015, there was a gap in, or a lack of capacity for the Native Hawaiian program. And this affected the Native Hawaiian management activities, including the development of the Native Hawaiian Management Plan. So capacity is a really important factor in doing this kind of work. On the next slide, you'll see that throughout the plan development, it was apparent that there were several goals for the plan. One, it had to be recognized as a conventional management plan by all co-managing agencies. So that's a really already a tall order for a managed site, a co-managed site with 7 agencies. It also needed to incorporate place and culture as the foundation of the management plan. It needed to be accessible and understood by all managers as the primary users. So even though it was immersed in Hawaiian culture, it needed to be accessible and understood by all managers. And it needed to resonate with Native Hawaiians, especially with the contributions that we received over those several years of consultation, really important information. So my predecessors looked to oral traditions for sources of inspiration and guidance on how to create this framework. And they began to incorporate some concepts such as the concept of duality and some other really specific components found within these oral traditions. But because these oral traditions come from different time periods and had very specific focuses or have very specific focuses, it was hard to identify how they were connected other than the place itself. And it each required a really in-depth knowledge about the oral traditions themselves. I thought some of these, I have a Hawaiian studies, Hawaiian language background. I thought that some of these approaches would get lost in translation, which prevented us from providing a management plan that was accessible for all managers. Some versions of the Native Hawaiian management plan were so immersed in oral traditions, I found it challenging thinking about implementation with other managers in mind. I thought it would be extremely intimidating for managers as well. But their work, my predecessor's work, provided insights into what could be done. Instead, I honed in on the overarching concepts related to Hawaiian cosmology and worldview and the particular functions of the islands that many of these oral traditions also connect to. So when I started with the monument in May of 2016, this was right before the monument was expanded in August of 2016. This was part of my proposal to NOAA, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and the Monument Management Board on how we would move forward. Basically walking them through how we would pick this back up after having no one working on it for several years. So what I also did was I interviewed my predecessors and other managers and members of the Native Hawaiian community to understand what had been done and what was most important to bring forward. There are many management documents in developing previous versions of the plan. We had to review every single one of them. At the same time, we began an oral histories project called Voices of Papahana Mokuakea to capture these important values and these lived experiences. And I needed to acquire this experiential knowledge about this genealogy of management that I was now a part of. So with the assistance of my colleague, Alyssa Miller, she's our planning and evaluation specialist, we compiled every planning document from these 4 general sources and identified anything that looked like a goal, an objective, or an action item. And I did the initial content analysis of all these pieces, and I identified 5 major themes and realized that they coincided with Hawaiian concepts that we found in our oral traditions, especially with Hawaiian cosmology and worldview. So I also worked with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs on the community engagement component. And in October of 2016, we presented the draft Maikopomai framework to the cultural working group. We got the blessing of our Native Hawaiian elders like Auntie Pua, who had offered the name Papahana Mokuakea in 2007. And even Aulani Wilhelm, I had asked her to come to the culture working group meeting to back me up. From there and throughout this timeline, which we never thought would take 5 additional years, we held a Native Hawaiian Plan workshop in April of 2017 to refine details of the plan. We provided drafts for review and agency updates and opportunities for the co-managing agencies to provide feedback. And we did this iteratively, with the community and the co-managing agencies until we came out with a final product. So now I want to present the overarching components of Maikopomai. So the Kumulipo is probably the most well-known Hawaiian creation chant that expresses Hawaiian cosmology in relation to time, space, and place. And this specifies our unique geography, our identity and geography. The Kumulipo is divided into 2 parts. The first part of the chant expresses a primordial realm of darkness known as Po. From this night realm, both supernatural and natural elements originate, and it is here where spirits and gods are most pronounced. According to Hawaiian belief, this is a place where life originates and where spirits return to after passing. In this time and space, the chant accounts for a series of biological births that begin with the coral polyp and continue as a genealogy of marine organisms, plants, and animals that eventually emerge into the realm of Ao. So the realm of Ao is a realm where people exist. Ao is conceived as a realm of light, mortality, and consciousness. And in this second half of our creation story, humans are born. And more than 1,000 family lineages by name, male and female ancestors, are identified along with other historical accounts. Furthermore, the chant is organized into 16 va, which are measurements of time and or space. 8 va occur in Po and 8 va occur in Ao. The chant is more than 2,000 lines long when in written form, and throughout the chant, unique Hawaiian values and traditions are expressed which continue to be relevant today. For instance, the balance in pairs is very important, often in opposites it's expressed. Humans exist because of our kinship relationship with nature. Also, humans have unique rights and responsibilities to care for nature because of this kinship relationship. And again, reinforcing the ideology that there's a strong codependence between people and place. So the Kumulipo, our Hawaiian creation story, is based on the Native Hawaiian understanding of our geography. The islands of Hawaii begin in the east where the sun rises and the islands are volcanically birthed from the oceanic womb and extend to the west where the sun sets and the islands return to their source. On the next slide, you'll see the line or the path that is known as Keala Nui Polohiwa Kane, the dark black sacred pathway of Kane, the Hawaiian god who is the sun. It is here that the sun can be observed directly overhead at the zenith, the point directly overhead of the observer, during the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere, also known as the summer solstice. Today, this path is known as the Tropic of Cancer. So it is on this path that Hawaiian ancestors understood that the archipelago was divided into night and day. Nowhere north of this path can you see the sun observed directly overhead. Today, many consider the region of Ao to be the tropics and Po to be the subtropics. Furthermore, as the Kumulipo is divided into 16 va, or measurements of time and or space, we see a similar representation across the archipelago with 8 small islands within Po and 8 large islands within Ao. Venturing into Hawaiian belief, the populated Hawaiian islands are where humans exist and where islands are being born and still have their mortal form, if you will. As the tectonic plate shifts away from the hotspot, the islands travel into Po, northwest, and within Po, the islands have eroded, lost much of their physical form, and have taken on spiritual attributes from this perspective. The island of Nihoa functioned as a staging ground for Hawaiian ancestors to access the island of Mokumanamana, the island temple forged by the hands of Wa'akea, Skyfather, who is the standard for time and space. And this island is also located on the Tropic of Cancer. It is an island of immense spiritual energy that Hawaiian ancestors, chiefs, and priests were able to interact and understand the spiritual nature of their place. And from a geological, spiritual, and cultural perspective, these islands are the Elder Islands, extending almost 30 million years across time and space. So we incorporated the concept of Po and Ao and the organization structure of the Kumulipo in Maikopomai, the Native Hawaiian Management Plan. We also relied on the Hawaiian celestial sphere. This is a depiction of a celestial sphere with the canoe or the va'a sitting on the surface of the ocean. In this orientation, the bottom half of the sphere is the depths of the ocean and the top portion is the dome of the sky. In ancient times, Hawaiian ancestors acknowledged that the world had 4 pillars that coincided with the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. And they were also known as Kukulu o Kahiki, or the pillars of Kahiki, the ancestral homeland. Some think this is Tahiti. So using the concept of kukulu or pillars and the zenith or the ho'okui, the point directly overhead of the observer, which was the 5th dimension, we were able to identify 5 management areas based on themes associated with the concept of duality and the cultural function and ideologies that the 2 regions of the Hawaiian archipelago represent. So with the Hawaiian archipelago superimposed on the Maikopomai framework, the plan is geospatially aligned with the Hawaiian cosmology and worldview. And as mentioned, there are 5 management dimensions acknowledged within Maikopomai. There are 4 kukulu or pillars with a central column to recognize the connecting force of the ho'okui, or zenith, where the sun is observed at Mokomanamana. Each management kukulu and the ho'okui identifies a kumu, a purpose, an alakai, or a guiding principle, and several pahuhopu, or desired outcomes. Furthermore, each kukulu and the ho'okui contains 4 kuhi-kuhi, or what we refer to as directional strategies, which is inspired by the function of the island of Nihoa, a staging ground for access to Mokumanamana. There are 16 strategies within the kukulu, the 2 columns on either side, on the east and west side of the central column. And remember, there are 16 eras of time in the Kumulipo, with an additional 4 in the, which is also a significant number in Hawaiian numerology. One being that the traditional counting system was based on a base 4 counting system and base 10. On the margins, you will notice the term keala, or pathways, to recognize the connecting force among the kukulu and the ho'okui, and thus our management as we travel from east to west and emerge from west to east. What we do in Papahana Mokuakea is an extension of our work in the Hawaiian Islands from Ni'ihau to Hawaii Island, the populated Hawaiian Islands. And the work we do here at home in the populated Hawaiian Islands should be an extension of our work in Papahana Mokuakea. So throughout this timeline, we held really important intersections with community and agencies to co-develop this management plan that met all of our management goals and all of our functions individually and collectively. And we're really proud that this has come forward. And so just really happy to share this with you. Again, we'll drop in some links to the webinars that we were able to do a month ago, I guess, and the document itself. But thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share this with you all. It comes with a lot of people's mana and spiritual energy. Mahalo.